I've asked Brian to come. He was a board member of the Hawaii Pacific Export Council many years ago. Huh?
Yes.
And we're glad to have him back here for this presentation. He's going to go over basically everything that falls under the category of logistics, which is a huge category. And almost every year we have a seminar just dedicated to logistics. We're not going to have one this year, most likely next year, but right now we have Brian here, and you can contact him anytime for advice on shipping. I would really recommend you get to know a few different people. Get to know your attorney, whoever that is, your international attorney who's going to handle some things that probably will be different from your intellectual property attorney. Get to know a banker, which we've introduced you to one today. There's many around, but an international banker, get to know them, not just the company, but get to know that banker. Go in and meet with them, but get to know the person that's helping you with the shipping. The shipping person, you develop a relationship with them, you talk to them about your packaging, your product, your customers, your distributors, what have you. They help you solve a lot of problems and save you a lot of money that you don't even understand that you could spend yet. So please get to know Brian or somebody like Brian. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Brian. I'll be right back.
Hi, good morning. I, like anything else, I'm learning. Just to let you know too, what I heard this morning, a lot of stuff that's new. I've been doing this for many, many years. I've been at the Honolulu International Airport in some field with the airlines for 50 some odd years. I just look young, no, but anyway, started young. But the point is that you folks are here today, you gotta consider yourself fortunate because 10 years ago, I used to teach exporting, and we also had the do's and taboos of importing, exporting, a lot of different classes, but people paid. They didn't pay me, I was always a volunteer, but they paid the organization, whether it was Kapilani Community College, we had night schools over there, people paid for that 3-session night school, University of Hawaii Manoa, at their biz ad department, we taught all about exporting, stuff like that. But people had to pay. And so consider yourself lucky, but what you've learned in a nutshell today, you actually got the 3 days worth of information in a really condensed version. But, and I haven't been doing this much because after traveling all the different islands, talking to different commodity groups on how to get your product to market, which is a big thing. It's always the last thing people consider. You love your product, you got a good market here, and then you start thinking, maybe I should do something, but it could be just getting it from one island to the next. But the point is that shipping is very important, and also it can make or break you too. Because we've had incidents like on the bottom of this slide, you see the dracaenas. Hawaii had the best dracaenas, and we were exporting them to Japan. When the U.S. government, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the Japan sector, and you'll see pictures of us going and selling the products. Hawaii's plants, because of our sunshine, the pots in 3 months get root bound, beautiful heads, the flowers are nice, compared to what is grown in Japan, where they get from Costa Rica these stalks, and they put them in the water, and when 3 months later, they don't have any root structure. The bottom looks like this. And then they have to use plastic styrofoam wedges, all that kind of stuff to keep it upright from falling down because there's no root. But because there's no root, our plants will live indoors in Japan for years. I went back 5 years later to one place, and I saw they hadn't done anything. So I asked them, what do you feed your plant? Water, that's it. Yeah, it looks the same as when we left it 5 years earlier. So anyway, because I'm always the last guy in a rush because you guys want to have lunch, and we have more speakers to come, but you folks all have this handout. I'm going to go fast through this slide presentation, but you can follow along with this, I think. So at any rate, okay, being in the middle of Pacific, you don't have much options. You got ocean or air, but within each side of it, you got all kinds of different ways of getting it. One thing about ocean, I may mention that, they don't take less than a container load to go to foreign destinations. You got to build up a lot of things, or you got to get a consolidation. Let's say a buyer wants to buy various different things. If each individual would send their own stuff, it might be more costly, as opposed to if everybody were to, or that buyer would say, okay, deliver it to one place. You have to find a big, someone that's willing to become the known shipper. Okay, that's the reason why you never heard of Hawaii Air Cargo. You probably never heard of an air freight forwarder, because we can't advertise, because we can't take anybody. We have to vet each shipper out because of TSA regulations and security. Anything that goes on a plane, we have to make sure that we have no bombs on it. So from the get-go, we can't pick up from the street corner from somebody or from a hotel. We get tested every so many months. We get a call from a guy saying, I'm with IBM. I'm at the Hilton Hawaiian Village. Can you pick it up? I want to ship it out. Sorry. We have to ask, where's your home office? Someplace on the mainland where there's actually a listing for that company has to identify that person, because we just can't get shipments that might be in question. It might be properly packaged and everything, but we don't know. But anything for the benefit of the traveling public, anything that gets on the plane, we have to make sure that the dog sniffs it, or the x-ray machine checks it out, or we have these swabbing techniques. But that's why you never heard of it. But at the same time, we have to make sure that you folks know that that's going to happen. Okay. I'm looking at ocean containers. If you don't mind, I'll sit a little bit. You can look at the slides. We have a multimodal, meaning it can go first via the port of entry and then trucked, or from a trucking location to a port. There's a lot of them, a lot of companies, and then, like I say, who do you go to see? It's going to be a matter of deciding what you really need. Now, one thing I want to mention, air freight is not regulated in the U.S. Okay, you can have somebody charging $1 a pound, and then they add on fuel surcharge and everything else. It might come up to $2 a pound, versus somebody that says, well, I'm going to charge you $1 a pound all inclusive. But you got to watch, because they may have other things. But the main thing is that, well, let me go on. There's an example I want to give you later. But a lot of the passenger flights, the freight is carried in the bellies of the plane. Okay, I have this, but you got the slides, so you can read it later. Okay, this is like going into the belly of the plane. You have a shot. The next slide shows what it looks inside. The passengers above. So the height of this thing is only 64 inches high, and we have these ULDs, unit load device containers, that fit right on. Before, you said, before my old days, we had to hand load the airplane, but they can still stick in the tail end of this thing. You see the canvas in the back. There's a door back there, and you can actually slide long pieces up there and tie it down if you have something that is manageable. But now, because of labor union laws, they can only carry, one person can carry or move maybe something that's 125 pounds only, or 150 pounds. Two people can carry maybe 150 pounds or a little bit more than that, but they will restrict you of what kind of size items that you can ship, or a pallet load, how big a pallet you can bring if they're going to have to hand load it versus put it in a unit load device.
Sorry,
Okay.
can I interrupt? Does everybody know what a pallet means?
Okay, oh, good question. Well, we have different types of pallets, and I'll show you. But normally you think about pallets as a wooden type, but now that is an issue. Anything international, we have to make sure that it's either on a plastic pallet or a wood pallet that's been treated. And the way to find out if it's treated, there'll be a stamp on it, actually a brand burnt into the wood that shows that it was, treated and it's okay. And it's because of the burrowing insects that get in, and they don't want it to spread all around the world. This is the inside of a wide body. I was telling Kanzo that a year ago, Amazon was bringing in shipments through FedEx, UPS, post office. They grew so big that right after maybe spring, they started to bring in their own freighter, one plane a day. Today, there's 2 planes a day coming in full. And for that matter, they don't have to go back full either. Normally, they say, oh, you're bringing in a flight, you're chartering a flight, you got to make it worthwhile. Amazon makes so much money, they have their own airlines. The plane does say Amazon and all that on the colors on the outside, but they bring in 2 a day. Can you imagine that? Maybe someday soon 3 a day. But I can feel it because a lot of my my customers are commercial customers. I can see all the stores that we normally, they either closed because they can't compete. You're supposed to know that. And then we have the ones that are existing today are usually specialty boutiques that maybe specifying there's a certain clientele that stays with them. But a lot of big companies that cannot compete with the Amazon closing their doors. And they make it, as Kanzo said, they make it so convenient to order online. And if I get something, I order, I got something damaged, it's easy to return it, and they'll right away send a replacement. You just let them know. So because of that, things are changing. And I'm learning so much this morning because even for me, things have changed. Okay, this is a big pallet. That thing is 125 inches long by 88 wide, and it can go up to 8 feet tall. And some areas you can go even higher than that, but they got to be positioned on the airplane where they can accept a little taller piece. But we can easily bring in automobiles. I even brought in rockets for our Pacific Missile Range facilities. And that's another interesting sidelight because you can't bring the explosive in. It's very difficult. But I handled a Raytheon, and Raytheon has its Patriot missiles, and they sold a bunch to Taiwan. So they chartered a flight to take it to Taiwan, a big plane like the one you just saw. And what happened is that I had to clear the shipment, all the documentation in Hawaii. It's the last port of export. But what happened, I got a call at midnight by the FAA guy. And he's, I've been at the airport a long time. He's a good friend, but he says, get your rear end over here. I'm going to put you in jail. I said, why? What happened? He said, well, the charter flight that you're handling, you file all the documents, but this plane has warheads. I go, not supposed to have warheads on them, but it had to be, I guess, entered a different way and exported a certain way. Let alone, the plane had to be parked 1,000 feet away from the passenger terminal, which was okay. We did that. But the point was that it wasn't filed that way. But because of the friendship, he said, hey, you can go back to bed. I already took care of that. I redid the paperwork for you. And then it went. But there's a lot of things that go on behind the scenes. And yet, a lot of people don't even look at the cost of shipping as a part. Some people just say, well, I'm buying it from this guy, and he only ships it a certain way. I got to live with that price. But no. Yes. But we always watch for any kind of stuff like that, explosives, contents under pressure, flammable liquids. All our employees have to be trained, even our drivers got to be trained on dangerous goods, because it is vital so that if our truck gets into an accident and there's a fire, the driver has to tell the fire department that, hey, if we got some dangerous stuff in there that will make it more flammable. So you can see that. They can say, well, if you have certain things like, say, chlorine gas, downwind, you got to clear about at least 1.5 miles downwind to make sure that nobody gets it. It has to be evacuated. But that's how dangerous it could be. But because we have people in the industry, whether it's truckers or freight forwarders, airlines, all looking out for the public's behalf. So, going back, people forget that we have the post office. And that's one of my favorite ways of shipping it, even personally, as well as, even telling customers. They have priority mail. And I gave a class like this to a group of shippers, and one lady came and says, you know, I have a small niche market. I make dog biscuits. It's like a doggy bakery, and then they ship it. They're on another island, but they're saying that I have a clientele of about maybe 30 customers, 40 customers, but they all buy only small lots. So a large box of the priority box that I had earlier, that's the one on the bottom right. That box, you can go up to 70 pounds. Of course, you'll never get 70 pounds, but that's only any place on the mainland. That's about 19 something, maybe under $20. You get the box free. They'll pick it up from you. There's a lot of stuff. So I did a comparison with FedEx, UPS, their best contract rates with that. I said, every shipment you're handling, you're going to be saving almost $10 as opposed to using any place else. So especially freight forwarder, for that one box, our minimum charge probably come up to about $90. But then she can send it to all her clientele. And because she doesn't have a big bakery, she got to make it so many times so perfect for her to split up her shippings. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, Brian. If you're just getting into exporting and you're going to start shipping product to Japan, for example, that same large box from USPS is about $82 flat rate ship, and you pack as much in there as you can. And as Brian said, you get about 70 pounds of whatever. So if you're sending 70 pounds of lead or just a box full of feathers, it's the same $82, right? Weight doesn't matter on the flat rate box. If you're just getting into exporting, you're likely to be using that service because it's very good. But once you start sending a little bit more, you find that it can be cost prohibitive, and the unit cost to shipping is expensive, and that's where a freight forwarder can help you figure that out. But when you're first getting started, you're going to be using that service, I believe.
That's something I would highly recommend because one, it might be 80 some odd dollars, but that includes customs clearance and delivery on the other end. So even FedEx has their small package service and everything else, but up to maybe not including 100 pounds, you got to look, then you can compare with that, because at 100 pounds, it's still cheaper to go with FedEx, UPS, than a freight forwarder or an airlines. Okay. Now, some of the basics, shipping is directional. Air shipping and ocean freight is directional, meaning that we can get rates at our wholesale costs going from here to Japan because we have all those wide-body planes with all the tourists that place for the flight, the fuel, comes here, but it goes back. You know, it comes full of cargo because they use Hawaii as a transfer location, and they give it to FedEx, UPS, Pacific Air Cargo, all the different airlines take it from here, whether it's coming on JL, Korean, China. They bring them into Honolulu and transfer it out. And then when it gets to destination, it's delivered to that carrier again. So it's directional. It's about maybe a third to a fourth of what you got to pay if you bring in something in the same items coming this way from Asia to Honolulu. So people, when you go out and sell to Japan or China or wherever, people always say, so far away and you don't have good less than container loads shipments, it's going to cost an arm and a leg. I said, just tell them to try it. And then that's why we need to know packaging. So besides directional, I'm saying that people are surprised once they find out what the rate is. And I had a customer in Nagoya, Japan, and he says, don't tell my competitors that I'm shipping or buying products from Hawaii. I said, why? He says, who are your customers? I want to go see them. But what happened was, he said, that's the best kept secret. He was doing very well because we were shipping the plants to him. And he was an interior-scape person. What happened was, because he had Hawaii grown plants, he didn't have to service it. He just had a pop-up thing in the pot. When the thing pops up, which is once in, 3 months, that means it needs water. And that's all they send somebody over with a pot. If you don't see anything that popping up, they just don't have to do anything. As opposed to the one grown in Japan, because the sun is not strong, his competitors are buying it from the local nurseries, and then after 6 months, the leaves start falling off, and because there's no root structure. So at any rate, what happened was it was tough to keep up with the demand because local people here didn't want to clean it. You have to make it really clean, no bugs, no nothing, because Japan is very strict on that. And what happened was that the one that we lost the account because the fuel surcharge came so high. Now you're paying almost double the price for freight because the fuel charges are so high. And right now, luckily, it's pretty stable. It's lower than what it was when we lost the accounts. But keep that in mind. You got to add everything. One lady was telling me that, oh, I'm paying 50 cents a pound. I said, my cost is more than that. He says, I wanted to audit her bill. And she says, no, you're just going to, I'm getting the cheap rate. But after about 6 months, 5 months later, she called me up and says, can you still audit my bills? I said, sure, be glad to. I said, what happened? She became a president of a commodity group, and and we were members. So she said, just come over and audit my bills. She gave me 5 shipments in 1 month, and I audited the bills. I said, within this 5 months, if you had used my company versus your 50 cents a pound, you would have saved $4,000 on your shipping. You could have had a heck of a Christmas party or whatever. She said, that can't be. How come? I says, well, when I audit your bills, that 50 cents a pound was there. But they had to add the fuel, security, pickup, delivery. But what happened is the next thing, okay, they charged by actual or dimensional weight. And her product was really lightweight, very lightweight, so everything had to be dimensionalized. And I'll show you the formula. But these things, you can ask me questions from your notes over there that I passed out. But here's the dimensional weight calculators. And this is done like FedEx, UPS, even the post office. Length times width times height in inches of every box. You divide by 166. And the answer, if it's larger than the weight, you got to pay for that dimensional weight factor. In our industry, and also internationally, it's 139 by FedEx, UPS. Now, domestically, our company charges 194, so you're not going to get as much dimensional weight on using us. And internationally, it's 166. Their domestic, FedEx, UPS is domestic factor. Now, this customer, the freight, I told you it's not regulated. The freight forwarder was using 94 as a divisor. She already had balloon freight, very light, but you divide by 94, her chargeable weight was great. That's why there was a huge difference in the 5 shipments, because she was paying for the air that the shipment took up. So anyway, that's something that you need to know. That's why we was talking about packaging, how to package stuff. There's some items that we've done where we've actually said, don't put it in a box. Your product can be separated. The box, fold it flat, put it in a separate box. If the customer can do it on the other end, let them put it in the box, because your box is too bulky. And there's different ways of going about doing that. We have also container rates going to mainland USA, domestic rates, but there aren't any air container rates going to Asia or around different parts of the world. It's only a domestic thing. Okay. Some of the documentation, if you have something that's valued over $2,500, you have to file an export deck with customs. And well, all these different things we have for plants, any kind of plant life, you have to have a phytosanitary inspection, meaning that, one, they check for the species, they check for any bugs, they look for eggs. As a matter of fact, some of the cut flower shipments that we sent over, I've been to the inspection sites, and I see the Japanese ag inspectors shaking the dendrobium flowers, and they look with a big magnifying glass, looking at the eggs that come out, and there shouldn't be any live eggs, although we've had some eggs known to be free, and then you end up having to incinerate it. They have to destroy it. There's also, once you get foodstuff, that hazard analysis critical control point, HiSTEP, is important too. Everything that people buy, even when you buy something from the snack shop, you get your ika, that you use for eating with your beer or lunching on it, that has to be entered with a HiSTEP. And the HiSTEP tells you from the time they catch the raw squid, how do you refrigerate it, at what temperature, when it gets in, it goes to the next transport point, what's the temperature there. Everything that has a chance of making it warmer or hotter has to be recorded. And then when you roast it, how is it roasted? So if you want to learn and find out that they got a HiSTEP, if you can get a hold of it, it's usually pretty private. But everything like that, if you get into the food products for importing, you got to do that. Same thing going out. If you're going to sell things like that, they got to know, in Japan especially. But any country will ask for that kind of stuff. Of course, security seating, and I had CITES, CITES. That's for things that are like elephant tusk, coral, a lot of things that are endangered species, whether you make it into jewelry or whatever, you have to make sure that you have a CITES signature. So, Incoterms we talked about is very important, but in your handout, there is your handout, the other page with all the things you know. I have the latest Incoterms there, and that's very important. Cargo insurance for air, you can buy additional cargo insurance. Normally it's covered at $9.10 a pound or $20 a kilo. It's with the airlines will do that. But they don't pay for all the claims. For instance, if you have melted chocolate or you have strawberries or whatever that thawed out and got damaged, they don't pay on that kind. They'll just tell you that it's not properly packaged. So it's important to know how they're taken care of. But anyway, cargo insurance too, like you have a boat, and we had this incident where Young Brothers barge was in a storm around going to the Big Island, and the containers on the top fell off. Now, they don't pay the insurance on that kind of stuff. What it is they have a special international law that says something like that was caused by the act of God. The rest of the people that got their merchandise properly, they end up having to share the cost of the lost items. So that takes a lot of, I guess, difficulties in collecting. And I went to a claims class, and a lot of stuff that I thought was a given is not. You drop something like a TV set or something delicate, your computer, the box that is packed in, to prevent anything from happening, they have a 4 feet high. If the thing will survive a drop of 4 feet high, then it's okay. But if it doesn't survive, you can't file a claim. So things like that are very important. Okay, required delivery date. We have all kinds. We have first day airs, overnight, second day, third day, fourth day, all kinds of different types of service. And there are a lot of things that are shipped from vendors on the mainland. If you buy something on Amazon and then you want the slow boat, they'll hold it, even if it's here in Honolulu. They hold it, and they have a date on each container, when to deliver. Anyway, to just show that there are that kind of information that you need. All right. I'm going to skip around. Like I say, air freight is not regulated, so you have to shop around. Just don't take my word for it, yeah? Okay, I'm going to go on. Any questions so far? Getting short of time. But I wanted to let you know that what you're learning here today is very important. What you got from DBED as far as joining or signing up with them, as also with DOA, Department of Ag, is important. So I'm going to show you some of the overseas, sales. These are the plants that we're selling overseas, and with the help of the state went and checked up all the plants to make sure they were clean and they would pass. This is at the vendor's, packing shed. And we had state, federal people all there to help with this. They wrapped it all, and a small, and this is when it arrived. Joanne Johnson is the president, at that time was the president of HENA, Hawaii Export Nursery Association. So we were in Tokyo with the first shipment, and we had 20 people in this ag inspection place. And we had 4 LD3 containers over there. It was first week in December. Okay. Ag says, I want this plan, that plan, taking it off the manifest or the invoice. We had to bring them in. So we took them from outside. We have the people from JL helping. Brought it in, inspected everything else, took them hour and a half to check everything else. I said, wow, all the shipments going to take that long? He says, only because our bosses are here and all these people are watching, so we have to make sure. What I failed to do, we all failed to do, we left all the containers with the doors open outside in the freezing cold. And we had these, all kinds of stuff like that. And they all could sell. But the one we left aside, unfortunately, we couldn't sell because we had it frozen outside. But anyway, those are some of the things that you live and learn. But this is one years ago. And again, this is the booth that DBED and DOA paid for. And we had all kinds of stuff. And that's funny that that plant on the side, they meaning the DOA hired a designer to bring, a vase and to decorate the booths and all that. What happened was they didn't put something to show the height. When the designer came in on Sunday, the day before, to design it, he brought vases that were no bigger than this thing. It's really tiny. So I had to go back to my hotel room and ask everybody else, bring your trash cans down. We used the trash cans. We tied it to the ends of the post to make do. And of course, these are girls that they hired that were fluent in Japanese. Neil Arakaki, some of you have known, he does a lot of leading the groups to the Japan New Product Show or the gift shows. He wins the contract to do a lot of stuff. He provides translators. He provides. He asks you to get translated. Like this have to be in Chinese. No sense putting it in English where the buyers can't read it. But we had a lot of this kind of stuff. Our booths are always the most popular ones. Hawaiian Host is another guy that went along, and we have this company, the French Gourmet. That first show in '94, they were the hit of the place. What happened was, it was in a big China, Beijing World Trade Show, and it was the trade show was in a foreign trade zone. The whole 4 stories, foreign trade zone, and I shipped the product. So I shipped frozen dough from Hawaii to there, and then I had retrieved it. And here on Sunday, they made an agreement with the adjoining hotel to bake it. So here I am with my forklift with a few boxes of frozen dough. And these are croissants, bear claws, all kinds of fancy stuff. And then here I'm going outside to the hotel next door, and the guard says, no, you can't go out. I said, oh, we're going to just have it baked next door. Can't. They brought in a specialist, an English-speaking person. They said, this is a foreign trade zone. Nothing leaves here because you didn't pay any duty. Oh, now how are we going to bake this stuff? Well, in the U.S. pavilion, which was the 4th floor, we had people selling ovens. It was a hotel. They were selling ovens, so we were just discouraged. And I went up there and I saw ovens. I said, does it work? He said, well, it'll work if we had propane, those small tanks. I said, and then we need something to bake. I said, I got something to bake. He said, we'll get the propane. Monday morning, the show was going to open at 9. 7:30, we were over there to check our booth to make sure everything's okay. The aroma from the 4th floor of all the baked goods just drew you up there. Went upstairs. Wow, so terrific smell. We were giving out chocolate candy, our juices, tropical juices. We had these samples of all the things. We were the most popular one. 3 days, we had like 75,000 people there. And then they all went through the place that baked it with the oven. They had on a cardboard, box. They just broke it apart, for samples, and they put the arrow, go to Hawaii booth, because they were still baking it as we were having the show. But they were so popular that the organizer says, next year in Shanghai, we'll give you, the French gourmet, any booth you want, because you guys are going to be the hit. It was so terrific. So anyway, and then they outgrew their small bakery in the bottom of 4th Street Mall. It was in the basement because it's cool. They freeze all their dough and then they send it out. And I was shipping it throughout Asia, small boxes with dry ice, and then it would be baked, defrosted, baked, let it rise. And it's just like they made it, but they have no waste. But they became so popular, they opened up a huge facility, state-of-the-art facility in Iwele, and that lasted about a year. They're starting to ship, because this girl on the left, she was hired as a rep to represent them, but she's from Hong Kong, and she became a rich person after that, because they moved the distribution from Hawaii right to Hong Kong. 40-foot containers would leave weekly to go to Hong Kong, and they distributed throughout Asia. And but she was bilingual, and she could speak Mandarin, and as well as what's the other language? Chinese? Cantonese, yes. Okay, this is another small product that was coming out of Niigata because of all the earthquakes. They lost a lot of prized fish. But this fish now is raised in Mililani, in their farm park. This is aerial view. It's huge. These big round things are probably 15 feet across in diameter, and they raise all kinds of fish. But they have auctions online. They use the internet, e-commerce, people from all around the world. And they picked Hawaii because they can ship overnight to any place on the mainland, overnight to Japan, Asia. They shut down their farm in Niigata. And so anyway, and to Europe, it's a 2-day shipping. And the fish, this koi, will last. So they have a big operation now. And you see FedEx and UPS trucks out there all the time. This is another show I'll just go real quickly by. This was in Fukuoka. We had a show that was sponsored by the state and also with the Oahu Visitors Bureau. They provided entertainment. It was a 5-day event. The first 3 days was at Tenjin train station. We had these booths that you're going to see. And we were giving out, like I say, in my room, the night before, I was cutting up pineapples in bite-sized pieces, and we're giving them out at this booth. That we had flowers for displays. We were giving out juices, we had chocolate candy, and we had a lot of people there. 3 days, and after that, we had a special session with buyers, potential buyers, to come and talk to us on a one-to-one basis. And of course, we also gave out papayas at this big department store. It was a publicized event, and we had a long line, but we had cases of papaya to give out. And well, first we had a demonstration on how to cut it open and how to eat it. So at any rate, okay, I run a little overtime, but if you need me, my cell phone number is on there, and you have the page printed up. Years ago, this book is out of print, but I was involved with this. This Hawaii product goes to market and tells you all about how and what to choose. I had a class like this in Hilo, and it was a small group, well, a little bigger than this, but it was there were several farmers and stuff like that. And one older Filipino gentleman, and he was there, is very interested. And then we had another class in Honolulu. And then I saw this young boy, and I said, "Oh, how come? What are you doing here?" He said, "My father forced me to come here." I said, "What does your father mean?" There was a father that went to the other class. He wanted the son who just didn't want to get into farming. After that session that we had, he was so excited. He said, "I'm going to go back, and I'm going to put my effort into doing what we had talked about here." And to this day, he has this young boy, he was probably only 20 years old, but he now today is doing a lot of papaya growing and exporting. So, what you folks are getting out of here, like I said, those people had to pay their way in. This one here you're getting free, but this is only the starter. So here, take it from there and go ahead and hopefully I wish you all the success. But if you have any questions before that, let me know. And also, when you go to a trade show, you should get an idea of how they're going to ship it. And then if they ship it to that destination, what is it going to cost? Okay, and it depends on how much they ship. So we can say, well, if you ship onesie and twosies, we can give samples. And do send the samples so that it can go through the process of being inspected by all the customs and the ag and the food and drug and whatever else. So then when you get the bigger shipments, you can still be testing it out, but work with your customers on the other end to make sure that they have the ability to not only go through customs, but also get it delivered and for them to sell. Yeah, I have a lot of, you've heard enough scary stories for you to really work on, but like I say, I used to have a class on some of the taboos and what not to do, and that's for another time. But at any rate, any questions?
Any questions for Brian?
All right.
I do have one.
Yes.
On cold storage, when you're shipping partial products, is there a difference in cost and travel?
Whenever you have anything that's perishable like that, today they don't allow, dry ice is a DG, or dangerous goods, because it emits carbon monoxide. And therefore, there's some restrictions on how much you can put on a plane, how much you can, in a way they put it. So right now, for a lot of the flights, we use dry gel ice. And there may be a cost on that to buy the gel ice. But we will do that, and we try to work with the carrier. Some carriers, I would say, I don't trust them. We don't use them anymore. And the sales rep will come and say, how come you're not using us? A lot of the airlines are hiring people that they contract cargo, they contract ramp services. So we had an incident, we're shipping out plants, and I left the door open because I told the manager, come, this door is open, but I don't want you folks to take it out until the plane actually lands and actually is ready to accept this, because it's very perishable. And I left the door open. I said, oh, let me go back to my office. 15 minutes later, I came back. Where's the container? It's not there anymore. And so I called the manager. I said, hey, the container's gone. I said, you're not going to take it out. The flight's not going to leave for another hour and a half. So he called the ramp services. Ramp services told the guy, bring it back. So when the driver came back, I told the tug driver, how come you took this? I had the door open, and there's a big thing, saying that perishable, keep away from extreme heat and cold. He said, well, I was going that way. I said, the flight's not even there yet. I was going that way, so I figured I'll take it because, the containers are numbered. I said, I had the door open. You wouldn't put plants like that in the hot sun. It's really hot over here. So after that, that company, every time we have a perishable stuff, we try to be there. And we have, like I say, chocolate candies all the time. We're one of the bigger chocolate candy shippers. But the business is down right now, so we don't have as much. But
What about soap? There's a lot of soap manufacturers in Hawaii.
Yes.
What is it like to ship soap? That seems temperature sensitive.
A lot of people, but the soap is not that bad because, yes, it has to be taken care of, meaning you can't just leave it out in the sun in that container. It'll bake and melt. But a lot of times they put, in the container, what we do is we try to put a blanket like the bubble wrap, but it's got that foil to reflect the heat. That also we tell the airlines, and we would pick the airlines wherever it's going to go, which carrier can hold back, taking the freight out, because it can sit for 1 hour out in the ramp by the plane side, because what happens? The plane lands, they unload all the baggage. And the baggage is taken in, then they bring back all the baggage at the early check-ins, and then they'll hold the cargo until they know how much space they have left for cargo. So it's bad then if you have something perishable. So we have to work with that airline that can, listen to our instructions. And because if it does get a problem, your product gets a problem, the airline's not going to pay the claim. And that's the unfortunate fact about that thing. But we do, as a matter of fact, because it's in my company's care, we do whatever he needs to. One customer, chocolate candy, he went with 2 cents a pound difference. He went with another order. He lost $10,000 worth of product. Then he calls me up, can you ship my stuff? Oh, thank you for the business, you know. So, but he said, when you go down, there's going to be a lady over there. She's an insurance inspector. And sure, I saw a lady with nice dress, high-heel shoes next to the cargo department. And she followed the truck, our truck this time. And then I wanted to be there. So I looked and I said, oh, how are you so nicely dressed? What are you doing at this airline cargo department? Says, well, I'm checking. I can't see how that previous shipment got, damaged. I didn't want to tell her. We didn't handle it. And what happened was a trucker took it to another stop on a flatbed in Hawaii and then dropped it off on that flatbed, and that carrier did not protect it. It was just, put in the warehouse and loaded at random, and it still got heat damage, and they couldn't sell it because it gets all white. It looks like it's, moldy. So you can't eat the chocolate. You're not going to get sick, but it doesn't look good. Although some companies now put that sugar outside, it looks like mold. So anyway, okay, you had any more questions? If not, I have a place where you can call a worksheet. You can look at that and call those people up.
Thank you. It's very helpful.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Thanks. Thank you. Again, just for time, I'm going to change the order very slightly because I know John Holman is here and he has a rather quick presentation. So, John, can you come up and we'll have... John Holman is the director of the Pacific for the United States Commercial Service. In terms of exporting and the federal government, John is your primary contact. He's also, by law, on the Hawaii Pacific Export Council as executive secretary. Is that right?
Great. Thank you, Rob. Aloha, everyone. I'm John Holman. I'm the director of the Pacific for the U.S. Commercial Service, which is a division of the United States Department of Commerce. Quick survey of hands here. How many of you have offices overseas in your organization? I don't see any hands, but I have good news for you. And the answer is all of you have a network of international business offices in 80 countries throughout the world through the U.S. Commercial Service, our agency. We are your tax dollars at work. And what we do is we help you to find buyers overseas, navigate customs, logistics, protect your intellectual property, understand the standards and regulations in the market you're targeting, pretty much from A to Z, helping you through the export process and connecting you with the buyers that you need to be successful. Today I'm going to give you a brief overview of our organization, some of the resources we have to help you in growing your business internationally. Next slide, please. U.S. Commercial Service, as I mentioned, 80 countries around the world, most often at the embassies, sometimes the consulates, and sometimes in business districts, but all the major markets around the world, and then in smaller markets where we don't have a presence, we work through the U.S. embassies in the State Department, the econ section. Next slide, please. Last year, for every dollar in taxpayer funding that our agency was funded with, we turned that into $392 in sales for U.S. companies. Who would take a 392 times return on your investment? Pretty good, right? I don't know about those other government agencies, but we're pretty proud of this return on investment and helping businesses like yours to grow and succeed internationally. Next slide, please. Our services are broken down into these 4 main categories. Next slide. Looking at market research. So when you're looking to export internationally, finding the path of least resistance, what markets can you get into in the least amount of time, cost, energy, and effort is key. And then leveraging that experience and revenue into the next market that you'd like to grow into. And one of the keys to doing that is doing some market research and identifying what are the markets best suited for your product or service, and what are some of the parameters in terms of market barriers, market entry time frames, trade events that may apply to your industry that you might want to learn about. And on our website, Export.Gov, we have thousands of reports on both countries and industry sectors around the world. Next slide. Trade events. We lead trade missions from the United States to markets overseas. We have a big one coming up called Trade Winds Asia. I'll tell you a little bit more about that later, coming up in April. We have International Buyer Program. This is where we recruit foreign buyers to major trade shows in the United States each year. Most of those trade shows happen on the 9th Island. Las Vegas, of course, that's where most of the big shows take place. We recruit delegations of buyers to come there and meet with you and conduct some matchmaking sessions. One to flag for everyone is Natural Products Expo, which takes place in Anaheim in March. We do recruit buyers to that event and do some matchmaking there. So if you're interested in participating in that program, I believe that DBED is supporting that through the HiSTEP program this year. That's one you want to take a look at. Certified trade fairs, these are events overseas that have the Department of Commerce stamp of approval as being good shows. And then single company promotions, this is a customized event for your business where we can set up a cocktail reception, a breakfast roundtable, a lunch presentation with pre-screened targeted buyers for your business. Next slide. Finding good partners, people in other markets around the world that are going to represent your business well, are going to pay you, are going to help you connect with the right distribution channels in market is key to being successful at exporting. And that's one of the key things that we do is help you find good partners. And our kind of signature service is called the Gold Key service, which is a matchmaking service. You tell us what market you're targeting. You've done your market research, and let's say you feel that Korea would be a good market for your products and services. You come to us. We kind of discuss it a little bit more, what your objectives are, what kind of partners you're looking for. Are you looking to sell direct to a certain type of retailer or maybe a distribution partner, or you just need an import agent? And then my colleagues in Korea through the Gold Key service will contact all of those prospective partners that meet your criteria, tell them about your business and your product or service, maybe even send over some samples, and then those that are interested and we have already pre-screened, we set up one-to-one meetings for you and them. We arrange the venue, the transportation, transit if necessary. All you need to do is show up, and now you're connected with some high-quality buyers. And because we're the U.S. government, it shakes out less legitimate partners on the other side and gives you immediate credibility in their eyes. So that's our signature service called the Gold Key service. Halfway to a Gold Key is called an initial market check. And this is a newer service, but we're doing this a lot more now, where it's all that upfront, reaching out, contacting prospective partners, telling them about your business. But instead of setting up meetings, we'll give you a readout on who's interested, what their feedback was, their contact details, so you can either follow up directly or we can roll that over into a Gold Key and set up the meetings for you. We also do background checks, the international company profile. So if you get contacted by someone, you meet someone at a trade show, and you're trying to determine, is this a good partner for me? I haven't been doing business in this market. I don't know if they have a good reputation. We can do a background check, look at their legal standing, financial standing, even send someone from the embassy out to their place of business in order to interview them and assess whether they'd be a good partner for you. And then Fuse, this is an online promotion where you can channel additional web traffic to your website through our sites overseas. So it's kind of like a classified ad, if you will. It'll also boost your search results tremendously in that market because the U.S. Embassy websites are linked throughout the country that you're looking to sell to. Next slide, please. When you're looking to do business internationally, all kinds of questions come up. We're just talking about shipping and packaging with Brian, tariffs, logistics, regulations, standards, documentation that you may need. All those questions we can help you answer. And if I can't answer myself, what we'll do is we'll loop in my colleagues overseas and get the information from them directly. And sometimes they'll contact the customs officials in that country to get very specific information for you when necessary. And we want to make sure that there's a level playing field out there, that you have all the information you need in order to do business successfully. And An increasing role that we're playing is in removing trade barriers. So if you see issues in the marketplace that you feel are unfair, they seem like they're discriminating against U.S. firms, you can let us know, and we can refer that to my colleagues in Washington who try to ferret out where there may be some trade barriers, and then if we can, remove those trade barriers moving forward. Next slide, please. Some resources that I just want you to be aware of. Our primary website is Export.Gov, and it's actually undergoing a major relaunch at the end of this month, and I invite everyone to come back and check it out. It's going to be a lot more interactive, and you can customize it based on your business, the industry you're in, the markets that you're interested in, and it's really impressive what I've seen so far. So just check back at the end of the month. In general, it has lots of information on how to look up your Schedule B and HS number, how to look up tariffs and taxes for various countries around the world, our market research library, as I mentioned, trade events. We also have webinars. So these are online events that you can listen to various sector opportunities that are coming up that pertain to your industry. Hawaii Export Support, that's the website here for the Hawaii Pacific Export Council with more trade information relevant for local businesses. If you go to tinyurl.com/export videos, you'll have all of the export training seminars just like this one that the Hawaii Pacific Export Council has put on over the last several years. And there's some tremendous programs on there, and you can watch them on demand at your leisure. And then finally, export-u.com is another free export tutorial. And they have, this is a partnership between the Commercial Service and the Small Business Development Centers. And in that, they have a webinar on how to cost and price your products overseas. I haven't seen anything like that in other places, and it's a really good tutorial. Next slide, please. Cost of our services. So we're a U.S. government agency. We're not allowed to make any money, but Congress requires when we do a service in country, we have to recoup some of our expenses. So anytime you contact me and you want to talk about strategy or tariffs or have questions about the export process, that's all free. If we do something in country, like an initial market check where we contact prospective partners, that's $350 for small businesses. Unless you have over 500 employees. Does anyone here have more than 500 employees? Okay, I didn't think so. If you're under 500 employees, which is 99.9% of Hawaii businesses, you get that small business rate, $350 for initial market check. The gold key is $950. So if you get a positive response in that initial market check and you want to set up the meetings, then we would just apply that $350 to the $950, and then we'd set those meetings up for you. And then you see the rates there for the international partner search and some of the other services that we offer. Rob.
Early this morning, Mark Ritchie talked about the company assistance program through DBET. If you qualify for that, some of that money could pay for this.
Absolutely. In fact, that money is encouraged. Congress encourages companies who receive any of those STEP funds to utilize commercial services because they see the value that we can provide for you. There's other things you can do, such as going to a trade show. You might consider combining a trade show with a gold key or with an initial market check, right? So if you're planning to go to a trade show in Japan, before you go, maybe you want to set up an initial market check, get some feedback on maybe 10 prospective partners, invite them to the show, or set up some meetings with them afterwards, or set up a gold key before or after the show to really make the most of your trip. And we certainly encourage you to utilize those HiSTEP funds for these services. Thanks, Rob. Next slide. Oh, yep. If we have a rating here, and this is surveys. This is again a government agency, pretty good, 4 stars, right? And I think that speaks highly of my colleagues and how well they are able to meet businesses' objectives overseas. Next slide, please. This is my contact details here. And I'm based right down the hall here at the Foreign Trade Zone, and I cover the whole state of Hawaii. So anyone who's watching online from the neighbor islands, you can contact me, and I am your entree point to your global network in markets around the world. Now, there's one more thing I want to share with you, and that is we have a major trade event coming up called TradeWinds Asia 2020, and it's going to be taking place the last week of April, second to last week of April, in Japan, Korea, Hong Kong, Thailand, and Vietnam. And so what we're doing is we're doing meetings, pre-screen meetings for you if you're interested in going to that event in any of those markets that you would like to explore further. Now, one thing that's really nice before the event, and you can do today, is if you go on our website, export.gov/tradewinds, it'll bring you to this site here. If you click on register, you're not committing to anything. You don't have to necessarily go, but you put in your details and the market you're interested in, and we'll do a free market assessment for you. So my colleagues in Korea, Japan, Vietnam, Thailand, Hong Kong, any of those markets you check, they'll look at your business, they'll survey the market, and then they'll send you a market assessment of how fertile they feel the market is for your products or services and give you a bit of a readout. And then you can decide whether you'd like to participate in TradeWinds or not, or maybe you want to do something else, go to a trade show or Gold Key. But the TradeWinds program is pretty robust. It's something that we put on as opposed to a trade show that is already happening and we're there setting up meetings for you on the sidelines of a show. So just want to give you a little plug for TradeWinds Asia 2020. Rob, anything else?
No, I think that's important to just cover the Gold Key, which was critical.
Yeah.
May I ask?
Yeah, question in the back?
On the fees that you do charge, if you wanted each one of those categories where fees are charged, because none of them are involved in the other, right? So you do $9.50 for the Gold Key, for the other one you do $3.50, and then if you wanted, you know, further down in terms of what's in the market, you'd add that cost and the other cost. So the total cost, if you wanted all of those services, depending, you know, how advanced you were in wanting to enter that market, you would just total up those four numbers.
Right. So the question was on the service fees. Can you, if you wanted all the services, would you just add them up? And that's correct. It's an a la carte model. The only exception is if you do an initial market check, which is $3.50, and it comes back positive, and you say, "Hey, this is great." We had 6. We just did this in Singapore with a local company. They went over there. We did an initial market check, and there were 6 companies in Singapore that said, "We're really interested in this company's products." And the company said, "Fantastic. Can we turn that into a Gold Key?" So we took the $3.50, applied it to the $9.50. So they only paid $600 difference. And then they were able to go over to Singapore, and we set up meetings for them with 6 partners, and I think several deals came out of it. So thank you for that question. Any other questions? All right. Well, now you know you have a global network at your fingertips, the U.S. Commercial Service, and we're here to help. If you're just getting started in your business, the Small Business Development Center is a great place to start. Also, the Patsy Mink Center has some good resources. I'm glad you're here participating in the HiSTEP program. Lots of valuable events, activities, and future seminars coming up. And when you're ready to take the next steps in terms of exporting, feel free to reach out to me and the U.S. Commercial Service. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I'd like to bring up Brenda Foster, Betty Brow, and Larry Foster again is going to join us on cultural issues for exporters. This is a topic I think often gets ignored, as does logistics. When Brian was finishing his talk, I really wanted to comment that I found that the companies that I've worked with and consulted with forget about logistics until the very end of the process, and they wind up having to spend a lot of money on shipping, and they could have saved a lot of money by working with Brian or a freight forwarder ahead of time on packaging and freight issues.
I thought the two of you wanted to sit together.
But we're not talking, you're going to moderate, you're going to...
I'm just going to ask you questions.
Yeah, so
yes. Sure.
why do you, okay, so answer the question?
Okay, so we have here Brenda Foster's the current chair of the Hawaii Pacific Export Council. Betty Brow is the vice chair. And then, of course, you've already met Larry from the legal standpoint. But I've asked them to join this panel. We'll talk about some of these issues, which I think are interesting. Just generally speaking, things that we should think about before we get involved in export markets. And these are some things that you can only learn when you're in market yourself. of course. But there are some things that you could do a little homework on and find out ahead of time. So, very briefly, let's review. You're originally from Vietnam.
I was born in Vietnam. Oh. I was born in Vietnam and grew up in a Vietnamese family, but I also live in a number of countries, including India, France, Russia, China, Hong Kong, and travel all through Asia for business. So I am very international focused, so to speak, much more so even than U.S. I lived in Hong Kong for 21 years, so that was the longest place. I mean, the place that I lived the longest in.
Thank you. I've worked in Asia probably 40-some years, obviously the gray hair. And the most recent job was in Shanghai for 8 years as president of the American Chamber of Commerce in Shanghai. I traveled throughout the region, worked with my colleagues around the region in the American Chamber of Commerce network, helping to work with their companies, doing strategy. I have also with the companies that came into China, we represented the Fortune 500 companies that were all invested in China, but more importantly, we really worked with a lot of SMEs, the small to medium-sized enterprises, and we set up a center, a trade investment center in Shanghai to work with any of the SMEs wanting to come into China.
If you haven't figured out yet, Brenda and I are related. So much of what she said, same for me. We first started going out to Asia in 1968 and have been going out regularly since then. So more recently when Brenda was in Shanghai, I taught at UH in the fall, and then January to August lived in Shanghai with her. Worked at a Chinese law firm for some years, taught at a Chinese university for a few years, did legal training programs for a few years. Now back here, still doing my legal training programs in China once or twice a year. So I've traveled as with Brenda, many places in Asia, but in terms of residence, it would be Taiwan and PRC.
Great. Okay, you can hold the microphone. So obviously when we're talking about exporting and working in foreign markets, I think one of the things that comes up immediately is language. There's no doubt that other countries speak other languages, but there are a lot of Americans that forget that. There's a lot of people in Hawaii that forget that, particularly in dealing with places like Japan, Korea, China, Taiwan. We tend to think that, oh, if we just go over there and speak English, or we do all of our marketing activity in English, everything will be fine. And I'd just like to get your opinion on that. What have you seen? I mean, 20 years ago versus now. Is there anything different in that regard?
Well, things are getting easier and easier for international business because there are more people in the world speaking English now. Americans tend not to speak a foreign language, but everyone else in the world learn English. And so it is easier, but nevertheless, if you don't know the language, you do lose something in translation, so to speak, especially if you don't have a very, very good translator. So even if you're not fluent or are not really conversant in a language, if you know something about that, it helps you to get the nuance of the conversation, as well as because language and culture are very interrelated, you have a feeling of the way, the people you're dealing with, how they, when they speak, what their attitude is toward what you have said or didn't say, or the negotiation, how that's going on. So I do believe that it's important to know a foreign language. It doesn't have to mean you know all the language of every place you deal with. But for me, I claim 3 fluent. I am Vietnamese, French, and English. I am conversant in Mandarin Chinese. I kind of understand Cantonese, having lived in Hong Kong. I can actually speak a little bit of Russian and can understand that because my husband and I worked there. And in fact, there was a time when I worked for the consul service there interviewing candidates for visa to the US in Russian. So my Russian at that time was pretty good. I can speak some German because I studied in high school. So just having all those languages, despite the fact that I would travel to other countries like Japan, where I don't really know the language, but I had a very big client base because it was in banking primarily. I'm a banker. You know, when I deal with the people, they forget actually that I'm not Japanese just because of the way I behave, the way I defer to them certain time, the way I lead my team. So I get a lot of respect in Japan, despite the fact I'm a woman, which some people wonder, but I never had any problem because I do feel that I have an affinity to that culture, having spoken languages or just being attuned to the language the way they speak it.
I think language is critically important. Primarily, as Betty said, it gives you or helps you understand a little bit about the culture of the country you're in. Years ago, when we were in and out of Asia and working, probably nobody really spoke English, and we always had translators. But I will say, although English is spoken a bit more, if you're going to conduct business, you're still going to have to be bilingual. In other words, you're going to have to know what you want in English. You're going to have to work with translators and underscore what I think we've talked about earlier, translators in the industry in which you're working, because the vocabulary is so much. And why do I say we still need to really understand that language? Is because the market is bigger. The people involved in business are bigger. And depending on who you're trying to reach, you're only going to reach them in the language of their culture. You're not going to reach them in English.
So one of my earlier career moves was I taught Chinese language in the U.S. It's difficult to learn a foreign language. So hopefully you're not getting the message of, in order to be an exporter, you need to speak Japanese, Chinese, Korean, whatever, fluently. I don't think that's what any of us are saying, but language is important. One thing I've seen over the years is, again, you travel to countries where you don't really know the language. If you just know a few words of that language, it makes them feel you really care. And that you took the time to, learn to say hello, goodbye, whatever. That makes a big difference. To get your language to a level where you can, so I'm a lawyer and I read contracts. To be able to read translate a contract, English and Chinese, at a level where you can sort of check and make sure both say the same thing, I don't recommend spending that much time, because that's going to take you a very long time. That's one of the jobs I had at the Chinese law firm, was making sure that all of our dual language materials actually said the same thing. Translation, part of it is the issue of jargon within an industry is very important. Hawaii has a deep linguistic base here, but so for example, we have a lot of Asians that live here, but they're and they might speak two languages, but they don't know anything about vocabulary of antitrust, vocabulary of genetics, all this kind of thing. So they can be translators, but they're not going to give you an accurate translation. And to come back, I'll close up again. As a lawyer, accurate translation is critical at certain stages of what you're doing. I think if you're just going to mail packages out to Korea, that's not so important. But if you're going to be entering into a distribution agreement with someone in Korea, you better have a lawyer here who reads and speaks Korean to help you to make sure that the contract both people look at is the same contract.
I think my goal of bringing up this topic of language is not to scare you and not to suggest that you personally have to be fluent in this language that you're operating in, but it's to show you that as a salesperson, I believe you have to set up your business model so that you make it as easy as possible for the customer to buy from you through all aspects of the sales and marketing process. And language is something that I've learned that American and Hawaii companies try to force on these other markets, and it doesn't work very well. And you need to be sensitive to that. And even if you're working with people in Japan, you're working with people in Germany, you're working with people in India, and they try and they want to speak English with you, they want to work in English, I'm begging you to spend more time on their language and get your marketing materials in their language, get your website in their language, have somebody in your organization that can deal with emails in Japanese or social media on Instagram in Korean or whatever your target market is, but be very sensitive to that. So another thing, when you start leaving this country, getting into Asia, getting into certain other parts of the world, you can run into different religions. And we need to be sensitive to that. We're not always sensitive to that, but there's certain things, certain religions have, certain parts of it are conservative about various aspects of things. For example, if you were selling pork jerky, there's significant parts of the world that are not a market for you. So Indonesia is a big one in Asia. That's the largest Muslim country. Don't even attempt it. Very simple things like that, but be cognizant of other people, what their religion is, how that makes them conservative in some areas, but how it might make you appear conservative in some areas too. Everybody's a little bit different on that. Do you have any comment on this topic?
I usually just stay away from religion. So you don't push your religion on people when you meet anyone. Actually, it's not just Asia, but I would say any country. It can lead to misinterpretation. If they are very fanatic of their religion, they would not appreciate you trying to impose your religion or your belief based on your God or whatever to them. And even mentioning it sometimes can be sensitive. So you listen and you just have a very open mind about everything and not really get into any real discussion about religion unless it's just to, show your interest in their life and, what they do, but not really prying into their religion or
It's a good policy. It's just don't talk about it.
I agree with everything Rob and Betty have said. And I think in terms of business and what you're planning and activities where you may take note, and whether it's religion or whether I would probably switch it to cultural and societal norms more instead of religion, would be on the various holidays that are celebrated in in whatever country we're dealing with. So in China, we were sure we were never doing major business events, or maybe we closed the office on certain holidays or gave staff time off because they knew they had to go. And whether the government gave it or not, we would give it. But what you need to understand is the societal norms, how they relate to their culture, and how, a religion may or may not play a part of it depending on the country you're in. So there would be things you would do. There's colors you stay away from, for example. You don't use black and you don't use white. There's just several things that you would work with. You don't give out clocks, for example, because it relates to times run out or death. You don't present people gifts of knives because that looks like you're severing the relationship, not wanting to work with them. There's unique issues in each of the countries. Some kind of goes across and is standardized, others are not. So it's more about doing due diligence, not only due diligence on your market, but due diligence on the culture and the people and what's important to them, to understand them and understand that so that you can approach it with some measure of understanding and definitely respect. But I tend to, other than a lot of the cultural issues I may take a look at with the country, I also am respectful of any religious practices and understand it, work around with it, and basically stay away from two things, religion and politics. And I think those bode well in most of the countries in Asia if you stay away from them. Understanding the government and government regulations and what needs to be applied or not is another issue. But politics in general, no. Religion, no.
Yeah, I would just echo what they're saying. The one thing I would add, I suspect most of us in the room, either born here or raised here. In Hawaii, we have a great tolerance for other cultures. That's not always true in other places around the world, but those of us who go out around the world, I think we have a leg up on a lot of people who just aren't used to other cultures, and we find it easy to sort of adapt into a culture.
Let's talk for a minute. I'm glad we have two women on this panel. Let's talk a little bit about being female in business in other parts of the world, particularly in Asia. I spent a lot of my life in Japan and Korea, for example. It's different being a businesswoman in those two countries compared to Singapore or Hong Kong or somewhere else. Do you have any comments on that?
Well, Rob is perfectly correct in that in certain countries, like actually in particular Japan and Korea, tend to be male dominated, and therefore women are still not fully accepted at the higher echelon of the so-called management ladder. It is difficult, and women are becoming more prominent, especially in family business, because if the father or the patriarch doesn't have sons, then the daughters are the one who are going to get into the business and help and so on. But they're getting better, but it's still not that acceptable. Even Singapore at one stage, it's getting better there too, but I know that Singapore Airlines at one time, if a woman get pregnant or whatever, immediately they remove them as a flight attendant, or they get to a certain age, they remove them. So there is still a certain discrimination toward women in those countries. But then other countries, and I must say I've read a lot about Vietnam because I live and breathe that culture. They said it's a patriarchal society because, of course, Vietnam adopted a lot of the Confucius ethics from China because they were dominated by China for 1,000 years. And publicly, yes, Confucianism is very prevalent in Vietnam, but actually, culturally, the women have always dominated the family from the very beginning. We had women who literally rose up as generals and became queens of the country in the very early years. And therefore, women in Vietnam look up to them and say, we are just as strong as a man. Within the family, they will control a lot of the finances. Publicly, they defer to their husband just for face reason. You should not underestimate women in many countries. In Hong Kong, similarly, a lot of women have risen up the rank to become powerful and certainly lead the company. Well, yes. Politically, she has risen up the rank. And I don't think it has a lot to do with whether she's a woman or man, so much as politically, she has always been more China, I guess, oriented, or certainly after China took over, she was that. But yes, there are some countries that are very liberal toward looking at women. Even Japan, they had a woman leader of one of the party at one time, but I don't think that lasted very long. And Mr. Abe has been trying to promote women, so it's getting there. But I have seen firsthand experience about how they treat women in Japan in the business world. You go to any company in Japan, and this is probably only about 10, 15 years ago, or even less, women are the one who go into the office, empty ashtrays and so on, even though they're managers and so on. I was at a meeting with a very large Japan company in our office in Hong Kong, and the two executives who came to visit were equal ranked. And as soon as they sat down, the man looked at the woman and said, "Go get her some tea." To which, of course, I immediately jumped up and said, no. We have, tea lady in Hong Kong. And they would serve tea, but I was shocked to see that kind of behavior. So it's still not, as I said, totally acceptable yet that the woman can be equal to the man.
Women of the same nationality of their country they are in still have a ways to go. There are challenges, like Betty has said. However, as a Western woman coming in and being the president and CEO of an organization or country, and a person with whom people had to negotiate with, I never had that problem. I mean, it was very clear when I came into the room that if there was going to either be a deal or something that happened, there wasn't going to, I may have had men on my staff who were with me, but I was the decision maker. I was the negotiator. And I found, regardless of whether I was in Japan doing something, in Korea, certainly in China, or other places in Thailand or Southeast Asia, it was very clear to the other executives in the room who they were going to have to convince and who they were going to have to deal with. But that was an advantage I had as a Western woman coming in with something others wanted. So I never had that issue of either being shunned aside or not taken seriously ever. Whether, and that even included one Chinese general I had to have a very long and heart-to-heart discussion with at one time, and actually he became quiet. I mean, I disagreed with him and explained why very politely and diplomatically, but they became quiet. And their comment was, it's very hard to deal with people regardless of if you're male or female, but in my case it was directed at me because I was female, if you think like them and you understand like them. But I never had the issue. It was about competence, and it was about the issues at hand and what needed to be resolved or decided or agreed upon, or not agreed upon in some cases. I also didn't agree with some of their issues, so did not. But I have never had that problem coming in. It was all for working with me on substance. For women within the country, and then I'll relate to China, it's still a long climb. The women who have been in government are all, and I think somewhat in Japan too in the case in the past, are single, not married, no children. And it's been that way. Where you see women really moving things in China, and I think around other parts of Asia, if you look at the various, excuse me, APEC women's workforces, is in the SMEs, the small to medium-sized enterprises.
And Taiwan, there's a lot of powerful.
Excuse me, and they're very powerful, and they're on the, not only the Fortune 500 list, but all these other lists of billionaires and women. Now, some of them have, taken over from their fathers who really built the business. Others haven't. They built their businesses from scratch.
So maybe the male perspective on this is irrelevant, but the it usually is, yeah. The gender equality is a work in progress all around the world. We certainly have a lot to do here in the United States. I don't think anybody has really achieved gender equality as I look around the world. The one comment I would make, and maybe I shouldn't be making this, but I do note in the Japanese press and in the Chinese press, an ongoing problem in mass public transportation is groping. And it's just, so if you're a woman and you're taking a subway in Hong Kong, China, Japan, Taiwan, you're going to be groped. And it's just a fact of life, if you will. They've tried to sort of work around it. The Me Too movement has spread at least to China, I know, and they're making some strides on that. But it's very much all around the world a work in progress.
But sorry, I know Betty wants to comment, but I would add, I don't want to scare any of our women here about traveling there, because I feel like Asia, by and large, is safe.
Yes.
Aside from the groping you were talking about, that happened to anybody, any woman there, not just a Western woman or whatever. That's not my point, is to scare people. I'm just bringing up the topic. Betty, go ahead.
Yeah, I never had problem traveling in Japan in the subway or anything. No, I wanted to add to what Brenda said. It's not just for Western women traveling to or going to a business meeting in Japan or Korea for that matter, But just being a foreign woman, they treat you very different than if you were a local woman. So I never had a problem myself. And I was head of international banking for Bank of Hawaii. I usually travel with senior officer who are the locals. So I have Japanese officer, that travel with me, and I'm the one who is given the VIP treatment. I'm the leader of the team, the CEO of the other company, or the banks, actually. They're chairman and CEO of banks, would deal with me, and he and I would talk, and my office are the one translating, just like their office are the one translating, and there has never been a problem. And it's not only for Bank of Hawaii, but when I was in Hong Kong, similarly, every time I traveled to Japan or Korean country where they discriminate against women, I had never had a problem. And I know China, one of the first central banker was a woman. So even China is more progressive, certainly, than Japan or Korea in that respect. So yes, if you go to business in those countries, despite what we tell you, we just want you to know what's happening in the countries, but you yourself will not have issues. And I totally agree with Rob. I mean, traveling is very safe in those countries for whatever, whoever you do. I think the only country or place that I was concerned about at one time was the Middle East. But that's another story. We don't deal with the Middle East here so much. So.
Thank you. Okay, let's go ahead, Brian.
Listen, my agent in Shanghai, 99 employees, from the president on down, 99 of them are women. My industry, air cargo industry, air freight forwarder, is overtaken more than 50% now women. Now, our industry has a reason for that. Women can multitask, and every time you take a phone call, you're going to do a lot of things, and you can't forget. Women tend to multitask. I'm not trying to build you guys up, but women tend to multitask. Men, now they just got to do one thing at a time, and they end up leaving. The only guys that stay are the ones that have to move freight around. Physically, they need to do that. But yeah, it's the Shanghai, when I went to visit, the mayor and the governor was female. The truck driver, the one driving the big pickup truck, I saw a lady driving up. What the heck is that? You do anything. There's no male, female sex.
In the universities in China, women dominate men. So they're more graduate, and they graduate at the higher level than the men. So in the one couple that I know, they went to medical school together, and the woman was the ranked number 1 in the class, and her husband is kind of so-so. They got married eventually, but she's the brain of the family, so to speak, and that's how they get the respect within their country.
Let's talk about clothing for a minute. This addresses men and women. I'll stand up here. I'm not the best model, but here I am. This is pretty much Hawaiian formal wear here. I could wear this to a meeting with the governor, I suppose, or whatever. But I couldn't wear this to a business meeting anywhere in Asia, really. Too colorful, really. I could wear a short sleeve shirt in Singapore and Malaysia and places like that where it's very warm. That would be fine, dark pants, what have you. But most other places, especially in Northeast Asia, Japan, Korea, parts of China, especially if I'm a salesperson, which most of you are going to be doing, I should have a coat and tie, dark black or navy blue, something like that. Just, I don't want to stand out. What's your opinion? I because you two are always dressed very well.
Definitely. Dress up rather than dress down. So even place like Hong Kong, which is super hot and humid, the men always wear suits and dress shirts. The women tend to wear suits, like me, skirts, meaning skirts, not pantsuits. I, in fact, had, because I lived there so long, I bought so many suits that to this day, I still wear all my Hong Kong suits because, and I have very few pantsuits because women there do not wear pantsuits. They wear still fairly formal. Japan, similarly. In fact, the men are allowed in the summertime to have a white shirt without a tie and without a coat. They leave a coat in the office when they have to wear it, but that's it. So if you go to Japan during the summertime, when it's really, really hot, you will see a sea of white shirts and dress pants. But there's no such thing as, oh, you start wearing sports shirt or whatever, unless it's a Western person or somebody working for a Western company that allow that kind of stuff. But even they, I think, try to be careful. But generally, if you go for meeting there, I would suggest you dress accordingly, meaning whatever they do there, you do it so that you don't stand out, because that would be the first thing they would think about. They see you and they say, he doesn't know about our culture, about our business way of behaving and whatever. And so it kind of already gives them a bad impression.
I should have said with the caveat, if you're going to a Hawaii pavilion, it's perfectly legitimate to wear something like this, right? That's great. It's showing you're from Hawaii. But if you're going to leave that pavilion and go out to a meeting, you should take a jacket or another shirt and then go to the meeting and do as they do locally. Any comment?
Agree with both Rob and Betty again. In China, it's a little bit less formal at times, but for myself or any of my top management, we were always dressed in business attire. Though in China, you can wear very nice pantsuits. And I did a lot of times because it was just very cold. And even in the summer at times, if you'd walk into air-conditioned buildings, I was convinced the air conditioning was set at like 32 degrees Fahrenheit. But I always dressed very professional, kept it that way, and encouraged my executives to do it. But I did see a lot of people would come in and out of meetings. And a lot of it, too, depends on the weather, I found, in China. I mean, we would be sitting in meetings. It wouldn't matter what I had. Say if I was wearing a very nice, dress and jacket and my heels and everything, because it was so cold, because there was no air, no heat in the building either. I would be sitting in my down coat with my hood and my gloves on, and we would be talking and conducting business. So in some ways, China was more practical, I thought. And in summer, people were dressed more casually. I never did as the president CEO. I always needed to maintain what I thought and what I saw others doing in China is that appropriate cultural business attire.
Yeah, my sense in China, both in business and certainly in law firms, the dress code is quite casual. Polo shirts for the men, whatever. Generally speaking, in the law firms, the women dress a lot better than the men do. They tend not to dress down where the men do. But you as a foreigner coming in, and particularly as a salesperson, it's much easier to take off a tie than it is to put one on. So go more formal. And then if things look like they're more casual, you can start dressing down within reason.
How have you found in the modern world, working in these foreign markets, what's it like now to go and entertain with customers? When I was younger and just starting my career, it was still very common to drink adult beverages at karaoke or something like that. That's backed off a bit. Do you have any experience with that?
I think depend on the country. So place like Japan or Korea, even China, there's a lot of drinking. So especially at night, where you go and first thing, smoking because it's not banned there compared to here. And so people will, pull out their cigarette. They will have, if it's Japan, it's sake, even during the daytime, even lunchtime. China is always this Mao-Tai or Baijiu, they call it these days, very, very strong drink. And it will be toasting all the time, wine. In China especially, you toast every single person at your table. And they in turn toast everybody else, so you're literally all night long you drink. I don't even really drink, but every time I go to China, I always feel like my liquor tolerance went up, sky high, and I can take a lot by the time I leave China. And then come back to Hawaii, of course, everything goes back down. But there is almost a pressure for you to do that even as a guest, because they toast you, you cannot be impolite, not toast back. So what I do is I will take literally a drop of whatever it is, liquor that they give me. And they will, for women, they will be a little bit more tolerant about you not draining your cup like they want, because the men will do that. And what they do with wine is they will just take a little bit at the bottom. This is for China. And they will drink the whole thing each time they toast, and then they pour more and they drink that. And if you have, for the women especially, if you have male, colleagues accompanying you, they actually can offer to drink on your behalf. So my officer tend to drink on my behalf, and it's acceptable rather than me drinking, and things like that. But you again, entertainment is something you go with the flow. You do what they do, and in terms of reversing, if you are the one doing the entertainment, you have to provide the same kind of food and drink that they would provide for you, so that it doesn't look like, you're totally different.
I think underlying this, it's important. Food's very important in any culture. It certainly is here in Hawaii. And the reason that it's important, I think, to go out to dinner or lunch, they don't do breakfast meetings, but certainly maybe lunch or dinner, is to get to know people. Relationship building is very important. And in most cultures, the way one gets a lot of relationship building is not talking about business. You go out and you have a nice meal, you're relaxing, and the Chinese at least love to know all your personal details, and they'll ask you things we would never ask people culturally ourselves in the West, not on the first meal or the first time you get together. Yeah, oh yeah. And how rich are you, or several things like that. But yes, but what's important is to get to know people. Now, what I've always felt in the old days, drinking really was important. I mean, I agree with Betty, the Mau Tai, various wine and the rest. And I am not a big drinker. But in the old days, I would take a sip. I'm not going to always empty my cup. But what has changed, especially under Xi Jinping in China, is that he has cut way back on entertaining. It's part of his anti-corruption drive. And so especially limiting banquets, going out to dinners. If you do go out to dinner with whoever you're hosting, they have to report back who they went to, not going to, fancy restaurants or fancy five-star restaurants, fancy five-star hotels. So, I mean, the hotels accommodated by just dropping their stars, even though they still were five-star, and say, oh, we're only a 3 or 5-star hotel. But what they did do is they cut back on drinking. I think I haven't seen it as much in terms of toasting and drinking for government officials. Private sector, yes. But for government officials, not so much. But I always adopted, I will take a sip of wine or a sip of whatever we're having. And I do think there are allowances for women. But I notice I've also been with men who just simply don't drink either. And we will be always polite. We will always toast the way we toast. But we're there for another reason. We're there to get to know our partners. And I think it's really important to get to know the partners. There's lots of stories where, say, for example, the Chinese or others might want to have their Western partner really be 3 sheets to the wind by the time they leave the evening dinner, so that the next day they're perhaps not as on the mark in the negotiations as possible. But I think it's important to respect the culture. If there is a little bit of drinking, you can do what you want. And I have some people who really just don't drink. And the Chinese, at least in my case, had always understood that. And so, like Betty says, you go with the flow, but with reason. And you know why you're there. And you really want to get to know, can you trust that person? Is this somebody I can work with? Are they good people? What do I think? In spite of the fact, before we get to the next day where we're going to draw up a contract.
Yeah, so I'll speak to China and Japan. Drinking is still an important part of business in China and Japan. At the government level, there's perhaps some changes. It's getting better, both in Japan and in China. But what I would, if you really love to drink, then go ahead and drink. But it's perfectly acceptable to say, I'm sorry, but I don't drink. And they'll accept that. They won't force you to drink. They won't force you to get drunk. But, draw the line and keep to it. Don't just say, well, maybe I'll have just a little. No, just say, I cannot drink. And they'll ask the personal question, well, why? Yeah, well, just tell them for medical reasons, and they'll usually stop there. But I would highly recommend just saying, I'm sorry, I don't drink for medical reasons. And then when you get back to the hotel, if you're so inclined, you can go to the bar. But I used to spend a lot of time at Japanese law faculty, and when they were drinking on the university's dime, boy, they just drank like fish. It was amazing. But they've gotten much better. So it's less. But again, I would abstain while you're traveling.
One of my pet peeves, we just have a couple more topics to cover, but one of the things I really want people to leave this, when you're traveling outside of the US, particularly in Asia, people take the business card or the name card or the calling card quite seriously. And so you should have a little case like this, especially if you're going to trade shows where you keep your business cards in here, have them ready to give out. And a lot of time, I really see this with a lot of Americans. We've gotten to the point where we just hand out a business card like this, here, or you just put it on the table. It's not like anything special. But in Asia, particularly Japan, Korea, China, Taiwan, it's quite a formal process. You're giving somebody something with your information on it, and you should take it from them with a lot of respect. And so pay very strict attention to this. I put up this book here. It's just an example of a very popular book that's been published for 25 years or more, and they update it every year or so. It's called Kiss, Bow, or Shake Hands. And it just has a chapter or so on each country around the world, the major countries that you might travel to. And it gives you a rough idea of what's the local customs there about certain things. But watch how the locals are doing it and introducing themselves in Japan. There's very little touching, and there's usually 3 or 4 feet between people. And not until you really get to know somebody very well would you ever contemplate like giving them a hug. In Hawaii, people are very huggy. And Asia, there's nowhere that's very huggy, but Japan is very, anti-hug. Big distance between people, and so keep that in mind when you're working with people, and don't get in their space. Even though these are very crowded cities, you're on the subway where you were just packed in like a sardine with all these people. But once you're meeting somebody, there's a significant amount of distance to be kept. And watch how you do the business card. Do you have any comments on this?
Yeah, fully agree with that. First of all, the first thing you do is you don't try to shake hand, you don't try to hug in any country until you get to see, let them make the first move. If they're going to do that, then you can reciprocate. But generally, they do not touch, certainly not the first meeting, and not in the business situation. So bow or just, kind of dip your head or say hello, wave, or whatever, but you don't try to shake hand, you don't try to hug them. Japan is very formal. That's the most formal of the Asian countries that I can think of when it comes to these kind of things. Even bowing, there are different level bowing depending on whether you're bowing to a senior, to an equal, to a junior, or whatever. And usually the junior is the one that bow first. So but they will be more tolerant towards you as a foreigner because they figured you wouldn't know. But at least, bow your head or bow your body or whatever to show them respect and to say hi before you make any other moves. So don't try to shake hands. China, a little bit more informal. In Vietnam, also a little bit more informal. But even those countries, and actually I would say of those two, China is even more informal than Vietnam. Vietnam, there is very much, they stick to this, especially between men and women. They don't really touch. that much if they don't know each other, unless they're brothers, sisters, or really co-workers or something that they've known each other for a long time. So you don't go up and start shaking hands with the opposite sex right away, unless they make the move, because they also have become more westernized now, and they know that people coming to visit them from a foreign country behave differently, and they try to adapt themselves. And so it's not uncommon these days to get people who greet you to immediately try to shake your hand. And if they do, then you shake their hands. So basically, again, it's like everything else. You watch what they do, or you let them make the first move if in doubt, and then you follow suit.
What you should also do is you should have the language of the country you're visiting on the other side of your card. So if one card, the front part or one side is in English, in my case, the other side I would have actually either in Chinese or Japanese. And when you go to present the card, you present it as Rob was doing with two hands, very respectful, and you put the card out. That's very important. When you receive another person's card, again, you receive it with both hands. And never, never take that card after you get it and put it down and start writing on that card. That even if you want to do it because you're meeting so many people and you want to try to remember the context or this particular person, have a notepad with you or something, and then just note the name and write across. But you're never to write on someone's card. That is considered very disrespectful.
I'll just focus on handshakes. In the West, we have this sense that you have to give a manly handshake, just a firm grip handshake. And if someone doesn't have a firm handshake, then they're a lesser person. And we have this, some sense you see, maybe more so on the mainland. In Asia, more and more people are shaking hands, but I'm always very careful to I don't clamp down. I give a very soft, weak handshake because the person on the other side is also giving me a very soft one, and you don't want to hurt anybody by just unexpectedly clamping down on their hand. So if handshaking is taking place, don't follow the Western model of, give me a handshake, but just very, very gently, take their hand.
I'd like to add one other point. When you're going to a meeting or to meet with somebody, please be on time. In fact, you can arrive a little early, but you don't necessarily have to go right into the office and wait. But you have to be on time because other countries take that very seriously. I mean, there are situations in major cities where something unforeseen has happened. Maybe there's a traffic accident or something, and you can't get there. And even though you've allowed a considerable amount of time to get to the meeting. But being on time is critically important. If for some reason the person you're meeting with is not there, then that's fine with them, but it is not fine for you if you've arranged a meeting to go see somebody else. You really have to be on time, and I cannot stress that enough, because if people come late to meetings, it's one, very disrespectful. Two, you also don't know the other person's schedule, and they may be busy, and they're taking time to meet with you. So again, be prompt, be on time, be respectful, and be polite.
Yeah, that's very true. If you're late to a meeting in Japan, you can't say, oh, sorry, traffic was bad. It doesn't matter.
Actually, in Japan, you can't be too early either. So at most 5 minutes early, and even then it's only because you have to go to the reception desk downstairs to announce to them that you're visiting the person. I did go to a meeting with the Seibu Group, which owned the Prince Hotel here, because they were kind of outside of Tokyo, so the driver didn't know how long it would take us to get there. And we gave plenty of time to get there, as Brenda would say. And of course, we ended up being 20 minutes early. And I had my CEO from Bank of Hawaii with me, and he's the kind who, very impatient. And he wasn't happy that we arrived 20 minutes early. And, so my office and I look at each other, and I look at this Seibu department store next door to the office and say, I haven't seen that department store in Tokyo. In Hong Kong, it's very, very, a very good the problem is, so why don't we walk through it so I can see what it's like? So we can kill that 15, 20 minutes so that we don't arrive too early at the office, because they're not prepared for you yet. And it's an embarrassment to them to have you come early, because then they have to stick you in a conference room and you have to sit there to wait, and they don't want you to have to wait. So you don't want to arrive too early either, but definitely don't arrive late. That's a no-no. Actually, the only two countries you can do that, Philippines and Thailand. Thailand, I mean, because of the traffic, they use that as an excuse for anything. In Bangkok, I talk but outside. And I used to go there, and the officer in the office, I would look at the time. I said, don't we have a meeting at 11 o'clock in the morning? It's 11 already, and we haven't even started yet. They said, don't worry, traffic, we'll just tell them traffic is bad. And it's perfectly acceptable, because the counterparty the host is also late. So it's like you can only have 2 or 3 meetings a day, because there's no way you're going to arrive on time. Philippines, always late. So again, it's not a problem if you go to those two countries. I don't know about other countries, but certainly even Vietnam, they're on time. Hong Kong, definitely on time. And Japan is like by the minute. The meeting starts at a certain time, and it's going to end at a certain time, and they will find a way of ending it right on time. So it's not like you will have a chance to, chat and so on and so forth. So it is a very important thing to remember.
Another quick point I'd like to make about names in Asia and how the naming conventions work for a family name and a first name. I see a lot of people in Hawaii, they'll receive an email or a business card from somebody in Japan. Let's say his given name is Hideki, his last name is Suzuki. They will send him an email that says, hey, how's it, Hideki? Right? How's it going? Or what's new? And we just never do that sort of thing. It's always Sato-san or Suzuki-san, or that's how you should refer to them until some point far in your relationship, he'll tell you, hey, why don't you just call me Hideki? Okay, then when you're friends for a long time, but that's many years. And I still feel that's sort of the way with Korea, China. You should say Mr. Wu, Miss Lee, like that for a long time. Don't jump into using their first name like we would in this country. You all know me now. You could send me an email and say, hey, dear Rob, hey, Rob, what's up? How's it? Whatever. Fine, perfectly fine, but not there. It doesn't work, and it makes them, they feel awkward. Everything about it is awkward. Do you have any comment?
Yeah, well, it is true that you address them by their last name and with their title.
Yes.
Not just the last name. However, one exception would be Vietnam. And Vietnam, because the history is such that there's a lot or very few family names there. And as a result, in order not to confuse one the other, even the Vietnamese actually took to calling each other by their first name. But they do put the title in front. So I would call Mrs. Brenda, instead of Mrs. Foster, because I still give her the title, but I use her first name rather than last name. I won't go into the history, but it had to do with the French, actually. When they first came, they got so confused about what is the family name, what's the first name, because it's reversed. As you know, the Asian name is you start with the last name, which is your family name, the middle name, and then the first name. And so when the French came, they reversed it, thinking that the first name is really the last name, and the last name is really the first name. And because of that, the Vietnamese kind of got used to it, I think, and also to differentiate each other. Again, the history of the family name is they used to try when the dynasty are taken over, overthrown, all the relatives or anybody with the name of that dynasty change the name to the next dynasty, because they don't want to be target of any assassination, because they try to eradicate whatever the claimant to the throne would be. And so people start adopting the name of the current dynasty. And that's why you have a lot of Nguyen in Vietnam, because the last dynasty in Vietnam, the last name was Nguyen. This is a history. And that's why people don't go around and say Mr. Nguyen or whatever, unless they travel to the US and now, that's the name they have. But in Vietnam, nobody go around and say Mr. Nguyen. They would call them by their first name. But as I said, they add that title, and the title could mean professor this or doctor that. It's very important to have that title.
Just a quick anecdote. When Brenda and I were living in Taiwan, Brenda's a very outgoing person, if you haven't figured that out yet. And she'd go, "Hi, I'm Brenda." So everybody knew her as Brenda. Then she would introduce me, and I became Mr. Brenda, because Brenda had to be her family name, because that's what, you only introduce yourself as your family name. So I was Mr. Brenda on Taiwan.
Actually, Japanese, if they start getting to know you well, for the women especially, they go by their first name, and so people would call me Betty-san rather than Brown-san, even though the men are called by their last name, so it would be Suzuki-san, but the women is the first name and san or chan, chan's even more of a diminutive.
Okay, I'm going to wrap this up. We're very late. That's my fault. Before we leave, I'm going to finish the cultural issues, so thank you very much for being here. Before we wrap this up, I wanted you, Brenda, to give a few comments about AmChams as a resource for exporters, not just Shanghai, but just AmChams in general and what that's all about.
There's an organization in the Asia-Pacific region, or Indo-Pacific region, we say now, that consists of American Chambers of Commerce in all the major cities. And they do represent U.S. business interests in those countries, not just the city they're located in, but really in the countries. And what's important is they are a fount of information and resources that they are more than willing to share as American companies come in. They will help you, they will introduce you to people in just similar to the Commerce Department, but they aren't charging you. They will introduce you to their committees, people in their committees that might be representative of the industry you want to enter in the country you're in. They will have executives and people talk with you. They will help, in my case, I helped arrange a lot of briefings, and my colleagues did too around the region. They would arrange briefings for people that come in. But if any organization within a country has its pulse on the business community, it is definitely the American Chambers of Commerce, because their members are the businesses operating in that country. They know the hurdles, they know the challenges, they know the opportunities, because they are the front lines. They can work with you also on government relations and the rest. So they're a little different. They're a little adjunct to the U.S. Commerce officials who are there for the U.S. Foreign Commercial Service. But I really, really promote the American Chambers of Commerce. They really have their hand on the pulse of what's going on, and they share it with members. And you do not have to be a member of that chamber. If you're going to work there and want to stay there, certainly they're going to recruit you to say, wouldn't you like to join and get more of our meetings? But they also do research papers. They do viewpoints on key aspects of industry. They have magazine articles. They're up to date with the government rules and regulations. And like I said, and the opportunities, and they're more than willing to share. I've never had anybody across the region tell me or see it myself that their business community, who are their members, ever refuse to help somebody. They don't look at it as you're my competitor. They don't see it that way. They want more American business out there.
But this isn't a government organization.
No, their American Chambers of Commerce are not-for-profit organizations. They do pay dues to the U.S. Chamber in Washington, D.C., but they don't take orders from them or anything. They're standalone organizations that represent American business in that country, and they know the issues.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming. Any quick questions before we move on? Because we have to move on very, very quickly. We have to be out of this room in 10 minutes.
They better not have questions.
Yeah, so I'm in a little awkward position because it's my talk that's the last one here, but I put it as last just in case we ran long. I'm going to talk about marketing in Asia. International marketing in general is sort of my expertise. I'm going to go through this very, very quickly, And the reason I'll do it quickly is because we will have a very much longer version of this, a full seminar on April 9th, which I hope you could attend on that day. So this will be sort of the 5-minute version of what I would normally spend quite a few hours on. There's two quick things you need to think about when you're talking about marketing in general. One of my gurus that I've read a lot about and studied his philosophy on sales and marketing was Peter Drucker, formerly from IBM, and others. He says an organization has two functions. It makes things and it sells those things. Everything else that goes on within a company is just supporting those two functions. Sales and marketing is critical. A lot of people say, well, what about marketing in Asia? And I look at it and I say, it's a bit of a mistake to say marketing in Asia, because really Asia is a geography, and then you have dozens of individual markets there that have some things in common, but really have very little in common, especially if you look at it compared to, say, Europe or South America or Central America. There's so much variation in Asia from country to country and border to border that it's very hard to just say, we're going to do marketing in Asia. And what I talk to the people that I consult to on sales and marketing in Asia is that we have to focus on one market to begin with and learn there and then expand to the next market. Don't think about, hey, I'm going to export to Asia. Pick a market, pick one country, pick one specific city in that country and work on that. And I put two countries here in bold, China and India. What's different about them compared to any place else on earth? They each have more than 1 billion people. I mean, that's remarkable, right? We think we live in a huge country. We have 350 million people here. These countries are 3 and 4 times the size of the United States in terms of population. So think about that. There's other countries on here that are actually quite big in population. We don't really think about that. Indonesia, 260 million people. Bangladesh, most people don't think about Bangladesh that much, but has more than 100 million people, almost the same size as Japan, right? Lots of people, lots of market out there to think about. There's different religions, different cultures, certainly different languages just in China and India. Within these countries, the language that's used from north to south and east and west is so different. So please don't fall into this trap that say, I'm exporting to Asia. You say, I'm exporting to Japan, or I'm exporting to Tokyo, I'm exporting to Ho Chi Minh City. Let's look at it that way. One of the things when you're working on your marketing plan is you have to figure out very quickly, what is my distribution? What is my channel? Am I selling directly? Am I using an agent? Am I using a distributor? Am I using a reseller? Or do I do nothing? And there's sort of a measure here of risk versus reward. By agent and distributor, I mean an agent is somebody who's out there working on your behalf, selling and marketing, maybe collecting some revenue, but they don't actually take ownership of the product. Whereas a distributor will buy the product and then sell it locally, maybe with your help somehow. A reseller is somebody who just buys it and sells it locally, and you have to do very little in that relationship, maybe nothing except sort of process the sales order. And then of course there's the option to do nothing. So you have to figure this out. What am I going to do? Most people straight away will go here. You could say, hey, I'm going to move to Tokyo and I'm going to start selling in the Japanese market. You could do that, but it's expensive. Do you speak Japanese? Can you read Japanese? Can you handle all of the regulations in Japan that you would have to read about? Probably not. So that's where agents come in. And this is sort of what most companies typically work somewhere in here. And over time, the business tends to move in this direction towards a reseller operation. But most people tend to operate in that part of the spectrum. Market research, critical component, trying to find information, get as much information as you can about a market. We talked to you about the Chambers of Commerce, the US Commercial Service. There's various ways to perform market research, probably no better than you going to the market yourself and looking around and meeting people, going to stores, seeing how the packaging works in that country, just meeting people, asking questions, learning things. There is no right answer. At some point, your market information that you've gathered, you have to decide, am I going to enter this market or am I not? And then you move forward. Segmenting the market, just like you would here or in the mainland, you find out who is actually going to buy my product. Let's say there's 120 million people in Japan. Will 120 million people buy your product? Probably not. Of that, I would suggest that maybe you only have 1 million that are your actual target market segment. And depending on what your product is, that could be a man, it could be a woman, it could be a woman between the ages of 25 and 35 with a certain amount of education and a certain amount of money to spend every year. And that's how you start segmenting the market, finding out exactly who is your customer, because not everybody is your customer. You have to accept that, and you have to find out who exactly is your target market segment. Then all of the messaging that you do to that target market segment starts to sing to them. They appreciate your messaging. They actively search it out. For example, we all have email. We all receive email every day. Some of it we want, most of it we don't want. You want to be the one that's sending the emails and the messages that the customer wants to receive. If you're getting into a mailbox of somebody that doesn't want your messaging, that's not your target market segment. You've just wasted time and money sending that email to them. So focus on this. Spend all of the energy you can finding your target market segment in that new market that you're looking into. We talked, earlier speakers talked a bit about this, and I can speak for hours on this subject, but work on a multilingual website, or at least a bilingual website for the market that you're looking at getting into. Look at blogs, look at getting in front of bloggers, influencers in that market. Work on an email newsletter database of key people, key customers in the market that you're looking at. I really recommend Instagram for most of the Hawaii customers, companies I talk to, clients I consult to. Instagram seems to get the most bang for the buck in Asia. Again, Japan has very little English. Don't make them read English. If you can at all avoid it, do as much as you can in Japanese. Korea has their own social media platforms that are popular there. Look into those. China is completely different. Almost all Google products are more or less banned in China. Instagram, Facebook, well, they're the same company. Those are banned. Snapchat, all of that is banned. There's Chinese local social media platforms that you would have to use if China is really what you're interested in. And another thing I recommend to people, if you find, for example, Japan is the market that you're most interested in setting something up, it's very easy to establish a local telephone number in Japan, a digital number, a virtual number that can ring to you here in Hawaii, but you better have somebody who can answer the phone in Japanese. But it's very easy and cheap to set something up. I think it shows people that you are interested in that market and you're willing to set up a local telephone number there. We will have on February 7th a seminar just on international trade shows, how to prepare for and act during a trade show, and then what to do after to maximize your return on that trade show. So I won't spend much time on this slide other than to say that I personally believe trade shows are invaluable in terms of what you can gain from market research there, but just talking to customers, getting an idea of what the market looks like. Hawaii, how could I say? All around the world, Hawaii has a very positive image. The words Hawaii and aloha are extremely positive. When anybody hears those words, they get visions of sunshine and palm trees and breezy, lazy beaches and clean air and everything's fresh and what have you. There are parts of the world that don't have that. Let's say, the example I often use is Transylvania. There's a place in Europe, and it's called Transylvania. When you hear that, what do you think? You're not thinking sunshine and positivity and all of this sort of stuff, right? But there are people in Transylvania that want to export products, right? They sort of have the game is weighted against them. In Hawaii, we have a great opportunity to get out in the world and market our products as made with aloha, made in Hawaii. That goes a very, very long way, and I strongly suggest you get on that bandwagon and market your products as much as possible in that regard. Pricing we talked a little bit about earlier. We can go over that in much later detail. I do want you to understand about the Incoterms that comes into marketing as well. Look that up. How are you going to sell your product? Meaning, Incoterms of X works means the customer's in charge of everything from my facility to their facility. All the shipping and insurance is their responsibility. That's one Incoterm. Another Incoterm is CIF. That's very common, where as a seller, I'm including the cost of the item, insurance, and freight to their facility, right? So you have to work that out ahead of time and make sure your Incoterms are well understood, and that all reflects in your pricing and what have you. Shipping, we talked a lot about that. I would just leave it that, as I said earlier, so many of the companies I meet in Hawaii look at shipping too late in the process, and they lose money on the orders because they haven't addressed all of these things up front. So please get in front of this issue and understand it early. Meet with people like Brian Suzuki and show him your product and your packaging and what it needs and how it would ship and where it would ship, and they can solve so many problems for you before those problems even develop. Does your product need warranty service? Does it need spare parts? If it ships and it's glass and it breaks during the shipment, how do you replace that quickly so that the customer doesn't feel any pain? Understand that quickly ahead of time. Some things very specific about Japan. These two things I've learned in the past many years in Hawaii are very important right now. The yen is cheaper now than it has been in the past, meaning if I take $1, I can buy more yen than I could in the past. On the flip side, that means that the dollar is expensive to the yen compared to what it has been for the past 30 years. So our Hawaii goods in the Japanese market feel very expensive. When a Japanese tourist gets off the plane here and they convert their yen to dollars and they go out and they buy things, it feels expensive to them compared to what it has in the past, right? And so we need to understand that. That trend, I don't think is going to reverse anytime soon. In fact, the yen will probably even get a little bit cheaper. So our products will continue to be more and more expensive to the Japanese consumer, where they weren't in the past. They felt cheaper. The other thing I find is the Hawaii companies that do really well with the Japanese market and other international markets are the products that are premium, meaning they're not competing on price. It's understood if I'm selling a candle, or I'm selling soap, or shampoo, or clothing, it's understood that it's a premium product and it's going to be a bit more expensive already. Then secondly, that product that tells a good story, the owners or the owner's background and passion for the product, it's making it into the product and it's obvious, and the packaging shows that, and the website shows that, and the marketing literature shows that. Those companies that are able to combine the premiumness and the good story behind it do extremely well in these foreign markets. A little bit of homework if you'd like to work on some things until the next time we meet and I can review what you've been doing. Try to define your product in 25 words or less. Make it real quick. Try to define your key market segment that you're selling to. Who is really your customer? Try to figure that out. Figure out if you're going to use an agent or a distributor, or you're going to go try to sell it yourself, and do a little homework and try to find who might be an agent that you could use. Who are the best agents in your particular industry in the market that you're interested in? Build a website if you don't have one already, but at least a page or a few paragraphs in the target market language explaining your product and what you're all about. Get a corporate email address, meaning if you sell, make up something, Mililani mangoes, get mililanimango.com. Don't use mililanimango@hotmail.com, right? Get a corporate, real top-level domain email address. It's just infinitely more professional, and it looks like you're a real company that can support the customer later, not just some fly-by-night Yahoo address or a Hotmail or Gmail or whatever. I think that that's very, very important. The other thing is, I don't have an example of a piece of paper in front of me. You have paper. That's printed on 8.5 by 11-inch paper. We call it letter-sized paper in the US. Only in the US is that used. Outside of the US, and certainly in Asia, everything is A4 size. It's a little bit thinner and slightly longer. If you're taking brochures to a trade show in Japan, try to print it on A4 paper, because if you take them 8.5 by 11-inch paper, it doesn't fit in their file systems or whatever. So they see it, it's awkward, they just throw it away. It gets round filed very quickly. So get used to setting up your documents. Microsoft Word or Adobe Acrobat, all of those programs have the ability to set up A4 as the format for the paper size. It's not easy to actually buy A4 paper in Hawaii, but if you're sending somebody a PDF of your product literature or whatever, send it in the formatted for A4 so that they can print it out properly on the paper that they're using. And get used to A4. Also get used to this date format of what I would say is 10 January 2020, because dealing with Asia, if you're dealing with Europe, Latin America, there's all kinds of variations as to whether the month comes first, or the day of the month comes first, or the year comes first. So if you were just using numbers, this could be 10/1/2020. Well, that could also be October 1st. There's a tremendous amount of confusion that way. This way, nobody's going to make everybody understands this system, and if you get used to it, it just is easy. Work on potentially a bilingual email. Try to post something in your target market language on Instagram, and then try this process over and over for a year. And after a year, I think you'll have a much better idea of what your target market is all about than you do today. And we could have a much more in-depth conversation after that year, and you wouldn't have spent a lot of money understanding what's going on with this target market segment. Okay, with that, I'm going to end. We have to leave the room. Any quick questions before we go? Here's my contact information. My office is here downstairs. I spend personally most of my time traveling in Asia selling things for people, but you can always email me or text me or what have you. Any quick, yes ma'am?
Quick question. I noticed that your commodities, you say soap and shampoos. Is that one of the biggest resources here?
Yeah. A lot of the companies that do well here are making those, for lack of a better term, beauty products and things like that do very, very well, particularly the premium products, right? If you're trying to compete with a lower end product, I find that those companies have a difficult time. But if you're positioning the product in the market as premium, made in Hawaii with aloha, fresh ingredients and what have you, They enjoy a very good margin and they do very well.
And with those commodities, are you targeting like hotel industries or are you?
Well, okay, that's a whole other topic as to how you sell your products or market your products to visitors to the islands and then get them to buy again once they get back to their home island or in Japan, for example. There's sort of two different marketing strategies, whether you're trying to get people to buy here locally or you're trying to get them to buy in Japan. And if you really have your act together, that there's a feedback loop there, that there's inventory for them already in Japan to buy from, and you get them hooked on the product while they're here, so that when they get back to Japan, it's easy and cheap for them to buy and they can get the product very quickly, right? As Kanzo Nara said earlier on the IT part of it, 60% of the shopping cart abandoning occurs because people don't like the shipping rates that pop up or the delay in shipment. Like it's going to take us a couple weeks to ship it from Hawaii. If it's already in Tokyo, it's already in Osaka, it's already in Seoul or Beijing, and it just takes a day for them to get it, they're very likely to go with that, right? And click, yes, let's pay, let's buy it.
So you have a distributor or agent that's already set up in that area?
That's the ideal situation. That's not the easiest thing to just set up in a day, but over a year or 2 or 3, yes, I believe that's the goal for most of our companies here. Any more questions? I'd like to thank everybody for coming. Please come to more of our seminars. We have a whole list of them on our website, on the DBET website. We look forward to seeing you soon. Next one's on the 24th. Thank you. Bye. Online, thank you very much, everybody.